All right. Welcome back to episode 7 of the Coastal Performance Nutrition Podcast. My name is Callum. I'm an online and face-to-face coach based here on the Central Coast, New South Wales, specializing in nutrition. And there it is on cue. This is my staffy Hank, who joins me for all of my intros. So today is episode 7. Apologies for missing an upload last week. It's been pretty crazy over here. But anyway, episode 7. I'm going to be touching on a couple of different things this episode. Instead of doing an episode on the one topic like a lot of the others have been, I'm going to touch on a few different things that have come up in my coaching business. So scale weight, food swaps, hunger versus cravings, and hunger during a fat loss phase. Hank's already bored apparently, so we'll get him out of the way. I reckon, get him on his way. I'm going to give you the most glorious sound to your ears. Cracking open a Kiwi Strawberry Celsius because I am a caffeine addict, to put it lightly. But here we go. So I want to do a bit of a weekly wrap-up. I may not do this weekly, so it may not be a weekly wrap-up, but I want to do somewhat of a wrap-up. First of all, thank you to each and every one of you who tune in to this podcast. Means a lot. And the positive feedback that I've gotten, messages, shares, all that sort of stuff, it means a lot. And it helps me sit down and do more of them. So thank you. Second of all, thank you again to everyone for just the support in general of everything I'm doing at the moment, because it has just been absolutely gangbusters over here at Coastal Performance Nutrition. So a lot of things going on, a couple of gym collaborations coming up where I'll be helping them out with some upcoming challenges and doing some educational stuff, which is the exact reason why I started this podcast. And it's something that I want to do more of in the year ahead. I brought on the lovely Kate. Kate is an amazing human who is helping me behind the scenes with content, back-end systems, processes, and just helping me not be so all over the place. When you have some rapid growth, your systems sometimes fall behind and get left on a scrappy Excel sheet. So she's been doing some awesome, amazing work, exceeding expectations, just improving my back-end processes, back-end systems so that I can help more people, which is exactly why I brought her onto the team. We are in the process of bringing on another coach as well, so stay tuned for that. I haven't released who it is. I have released that I'm bringing another coach on. Again, very excited about that. Both this coach and Kate were two people who I wanted to bring onto the team for their specific skill set. I wasn't hiring as such. I wanted both of them to help me with my overall mission to eventually touch the lives of 1 million people and leave them in a better spot than I found them. So the specific skills that those two individuals have are what I need and want to help me impact more people, impact more lives, which is exactly why I'm doing this whole thing. So very excited for that. And just all around, yeah, we've been busy. A lot of content, a lot of coaching, a lot of clients on the team now, which is exciting, but everything's awesome. So thank you very much to every single one of you. I'm going to leave that there for the weekly wrap up. We'll leave that there. Now into today's topic. So like I said, I want to touch on scale weight. I want to touch on food swaps. I want to touch on hunger during a fat loss phase and hunger versus cravings. I'll probably obviously do those two together. Scale weight. Scale weight is one that, you know what? I'm going to take a sip of caffeine first. It's damn good. Scale weight is one that can play a lot of mind games. And the scale can be very unpredictable. So it's important that if we're going to be using the scale as a measure of progress, whether it's fat loss, muscle gain, strength gain, a cut for, in some of my clients' cases, cuts for upcoming powerlifting competitions, no matter what we're using the scale for, we need to understand the things that can influence scale weight so that we don't get as attached to the number that we're seeing. Because if you have a fat loss goal, you probably want to see the scale come down. If you have a goal to gain muscle mass, you probably want to see the scale going up. But the unfortunate reality is that there are so many things that go into scale weight that it can sometimes be hard to use the scale as the only measure. You have to have context of the whole picture, and the scale is just one measure of progress. It's not the be all end all. Now, the first thing to understand is why we see scale fluctuations occur so much. In reality, the biggest determinant of scale fluctuations is usually going to be water balance. So our body is made up of a lot of water. I think the stats are 60, 70%, something like that. So our body is made up of a lot of water, and there are plenty of things that can influence the balance of that water and how much water we're retaining or losing on a daily basis. So it's important to understand that if we see massive fluctuations on the scale, it is probably not due to large swings in body fat loss. So if we just run the numbers right, if you're in a 1,100 calorie deficit per day, so you're eating less 1,000 calories or 1,100 calories less than your calorie maintenance, you are probably losing around about 1 kilo per week. So on a daily basis, what's that? Let me pull out the old calculator. On a daily basis, you are losing, I should be able to do this maths in my head, but I can't. You are losing about 140 grams of fat on a daily basis. And the same thing goes in the other direction. If you eat, 1,100 to 1,500 calories above your maintenance, you might gain 100 to 150 grams overnight or from one day to the next. It doesn't always work exactly like that. It's not just about maths, but roughly that's the numbers. That's how they work out. About 140 grams-ish of body fat if you're eating in a 1,000 to 1,200 calorie deficit, or if you're eating in a 1,000 to 1,200 calorie surplus above your maintenance. So, but in knowing that, it's actually very common to see the scale swing around a lot more than that. And it's not too uncommon for some of my clients as well, where from Monday to Wednesday, they will lose 1.5 kilos or 1 kilo or 800 grams. Or in the other direction, they'll have a big day on Saturday, some drinks, plenty of food, and they'll see the scale go from 79 up to 80.5 or 81. But it's important to understand, if you understand what those fluctuations actually are, you can manage your mental state a little bit better. So like I said, the biggest determinant of scale weight is probably going to be water fluctuation. So there's a lot of things that can influence how much water our body is retaining. Number one is how much water you drank and how recently you drank it. If I sit here right now, weigh myself, probably going to be about 85. If I go to the kitchen and grab a liter of water and drink that whole liter, I am now going to be 86 kilos or thereabouts. So how much water you drank or didn't drink the previous day, that is going to impact the scale. But how much you're sweating as well, and whether or not you replaced that sweat, that's going to have a big impact as well. So if you had a massive day on Sunday, hot as hell, sweated like no tomorrow, and didn't drink enough water, you might wake up 1.5, 2 kilos lighter. Doesn't mean you lost fat, doesn't mean you gained fat, you just are dehydrated. The other things that can influence how much water you're actually retaining, let's say in a perfect world, every single day you drink the exact same amount of water. You may still see fluctuations in how much water your body is actually holding onto or how much it's letting go of. And the main things that are going to determine that, number one is going to be carb intake. So when we consume carbohydrates, if we don't use them as energy, we don't burn them as energy, we store it as what is called glycogen. So glycogen is essentially a stored form of carbohydrates. And each gram of carbohydrates is stored with around about 3 mils or 3 grams of water. So let's say, for example, from one day to the next, you have an extra 100 grams of carbs compared to what you usually have. And that puts you in a small calorie surplus, and your body decides to store all 100 grams of those carbohydrates. it will store that 100 grams of carbohydrates with 300 mils or 300 grams of water. So just by eating an extra 100 grams of carbohydrates, you are now potentially seeing the scale go up by 400 grams. Doesn't mean you gain fat or lost fat or anything happened. You just have more stored carbohydrates inside your muscles, which for a lot of people is probably a good thing. Just means you have more energy for training. Your muscles look a bit fuller, a bit bigger, which is, for a lot of us, what we're doing this whole thing for. So that's going to play a big role. The next thing that's going to influence how much water you hold or piss out essentially is going to be your sodium intake or your overall electrolyte intake. Sodium is an electrolyte, so salt is sodium chloride. Sodium is an electrolyte that has a electrical charge essentially, and that electrical charge attracts water. All right. So when more sodium is inside our cells, it's going to pull more water with it. All right. And so if we have more sodium in our diet, we increase the amount of salt we consume, or sodium in particular. The most common offenders for this are going to be processed foods. A lot of processed foods have a lot of salt added, not just for flavor, but so that they have a longer shelf life as well. So if from one day to the next you consume a lot more sodium or a lot more salt, you're just going to hold on to a bunch more water, all right? A lot more water. So again, that is going to show up as an increase on the scale. Some other things that can influence water balance is going to be, or not so much water balance, like carbs and sodium are probably going to be the main ones that are going to influence water balance. The other thing that can influence water balance that is not related to your nutrition is hormonal fluctuations, particularly for women. Those of you who are women, I'm sure you can relate to, sometimes during the month, especially leading into your period, at different phases of the menstrual cycle, you are going to see a fluctuation in your hormone levels. That's what happens during the menstrual cycle. So when those hormonal fluctuations occur, you may see differing amounts of water retention or water loss from your body. And that is going to lead to some fluctuations on the scale. So sometimes what I've seen just personally in practice is around 3-ish days leading into a woman's period, they will experience a little bit more water retention, a little bit more bloating. And then across the first 3 to 4 days of their period, they see the same issue. And then at the end of the period, that usually drops off a little bit. So if you have been wondering that yourself and you just wonder why the scale sits a little bit higher leading into your period or during your period, it's most likely just down to a combination of a couple of things. Hormonal fluctuations, which can increase the amount of water that you're retaining, especially during that sort of 10-day period. Some other, and by 10-day period, I mean time period, not menstrual cycle. And alongside that, we usually see an increase in cravings, which is going to be another topic later on in the podcast. And if that increase in cravings leads you to increase your consumption of carbohydrate-containing foods, then we see the scale go up due to more water retention from hormonal fluctuations. And then we might see the scale go up a little bit due to increased carbohydrate consumption as well. Sort of a 1+1 sort of thing. So it is completely normal for, during that phase of the menstrual cycle to see the scale fluctuate, or any phase of the menstrual cycle for that matter. Men, we don't have that same fluctuation. Our hormones are sort of just relatively stable the whole month. Whereas women, your hormones are doing this. They're up and then they're down. So because of that, you need to expect that the scale may not be as linear as it might be for a male. And that's just a reality that we have to manage and expect so that we don't freak out when we see the scale doing these ones. So they're probably the 3 biggest things I would say is sodium, carbohydrates, and menstrual cycle hormonal fluctuations, or just hormonal fluctuations in general. Some other things that can lead to differing amounts or large scale fluctuations is just overall food volume or food timing. You calories and food volume aren't the same thing. You could eat 2,000 calories from 1 kilo of food across the course of the day. You could also eat 2,000 calories from 3 kilos of food across the course of the day. And if you're eating 3 kilos of food, even though it's the same amount of calories, that food is going to be inside you, in your digestive system. And digestion is not a rapid process. So from one day to the next, you will still have food from the previous day in your digestive system. And that is going to show up on the scale as well. All right. So I think they're probably the 4 main things, or is it 4? Sodium, carbohydrates, water retention overall, especially from, menstrual cycle fluctuations or differing amounts of sodium and carbohydrates, and then the amount of food volume in your digestive system. The other thing that's going to influence the scale weight that is unrelated to all of those is just the time of the day that you weigh yourself. Making sure that if you're going to weigh yourself, the best way to do it is first thing in the morning, after you get out of bed, after you go and do a number 1, number 2, minimal clothing on, jump on the scale. That's going to give you the most consistent and accurate reflection of what your scale weight actually is. Because if one day you're weighing yourself first thing in the morning before food and drink, and then the next you're weighing yourself at the gym at night at 6 p.m. after a day of eating and drinking, you're not getting as accurate of a reflection of your actual body weight as you would if you kept it consistent and did it first thing in the morning after you get out of bed. All right. So fluctuations on the scale are normal. And for some of my clients in particular, especially I'm helping some powerlifters at the moment prep for their powerlifting competition, which involves a weight cut. And one of them in particular, we are managing variables as much as we can, particularly keeping carbs and sodium and meal times to some extent relatively consistent so that we get less noise on the scale, so we can be more predictable with changes. So if you want to reduce the amount of fluctuation that you see on the scale, the best way to do that is, obviously when it comes to the menstrual cycle, you can't inherently just, force your hormones to change, but you can make sure that you're keeping your sodium or salt consumption relatively consistent. So if you're putting salt on your foods, make sure you have like a certain amount of cracks of the salt shaker that you put on your dinner, for example, or keeping the amount of processed food you consume relatively consistent, or at least the sources of that food relatively consistent, keeping your carb intake relatively the same, and keeping your water consumption relatively the same. They're all things that you can do to manage scale weight, but even if you are super neurotic about your sodium intake, your carb intake, your water consumption, you're still going to see fluctuations on the scale, because sometimes your body just does weird stuff. But something that I see a lot when it relates to fat loss in particular is what we call the whoosh effect. Sometimes the scale doesn't move linearly, and a lot of my clients are going to be listening to this right now and be like, yep, I experienced this, where you will be in a calorie deficit, like, a 5, 6, 7, 8, 1,000 calorie deficit per day. And all week, the scale just stays exactly the same. And you're just like, oh my God, what is going on? I'm working so hard and I'm not seeing any progress. And then you wake up one day and the scale's down 1.3 kilos or something like that. It happens all the time. Sometimes not to that extent, but sometimes it's like 70, 70, 70, 70, 70, 70, 68.9. And it's just like, what the hell? Like, we just skipped a kilo. And that is just I have no scientific explanation for it. My best understanding of it is that as we lose weight in general or lose body fat, our body tries to defend against it by shifting water balance a little bit. But then eventually it's just like, all right, have it. Have the weight loss, and it just whoosh effect. You go to the toilet a little bit more than usual, your digestion speeds up, you do a longer piss or a bigger piss than usual, and you essentially are a lot lighter. Seemingly overnight, but it's actually just the fact that you were losing fat the whole time. Your body just took a little bit longer to actually show it on the scale. But visually and biologically, you were losing fat the whole time. It just didn't show up on the scale. That's all I'm going to do around scale weight. That's all I'm going to do around scale weight. Now, on to the next topic, food swaps. I've made a couple of posts about this over the last couple of months. This whole idea of food swaps, the idea that we don't have to overhaul our diet completely in order to make changes. We don't have to be eating this way and then eat in a completely opposite way if we want to change our body weight or change our health in general. The most common scenario where this applies is during a fat loss phase, if you are trying to lose body fat. What I see some people do that sort of bites them in the ass a little bit is they're eating a certain way, and then on Monday, they start on Monday and they eat completely different foods, all right? And that is such a big change to your overall routine, behaviors, and habits to be eating a certain way one day and then completely different the next. What I prefer to do, if in both directions, if someone wants to lose fat or someone wants to gain weight, what I prefer to do is make food swaps. So try and keep food selection relatively similar, but just make some swaps from one type of that food to another type of that food in order to manipulate calorie or macronutrient intake, so protein, carb, and fat intake. To give an example with fat loss, let's say, for example, this is a really easy example, but I use it all the time because it's a good proof of concept, I guess. Let's say someone is having steak, potatoes, and vegetables for dinner. They might have a nice, fatty, delicious cut of steak, maybe like a porterhouse with a big, thick, strip of fat along the side. They might cook it in 15 to 20 mils of olive oil because they just poured it from the bottle. They might have a bunch of barbecue sauce all over that. They might cook some potatoes, and the potatoes are drenched in olive oil or their oil of choice, maybe even some butter. And then they have some vegetables. And again, we cover the veg in sauce, or maybe we just have it by itself. That meal may have, let's just say, 700 calories, like shooting in the dark. How do we reduce the calories of that meal? The easiest way to do it is going to be, all right, let's go from a fatty cut of steak to a leaner cut of steak. Going from a porterhouse maybe to a rump or something like that. When it comes to the potatoes, instead of having regular potatoes, go to God's gift to humankind and use spud-like potatoes, lower carb potatoes, higher volume, less calories. And then when it comes to oils, instead of, pouring oil into the bottle and just free pouring it, maybe we regulate how much oil we put in there, or instead we use an oil spray or just grill it on the barbecue or something like that. And then when it comes to the sauces that we use, it's as simple as swapping from a, regular old barbecue sauce to maybe a reduced sugar, reduced salt barbecue sauce instead. And that is relatively the same meal, but has substantially less calories. So you feel like you're still eating the food that you enjoy, but at the same time, you're still reducing your calorie intake. And if you do that sort of swap across all of your meals, it adds up a lot. Something as simple as, let's say in the morning, you have yogurt, granola, peanut butter, and some honey. Maybe instead of the yogurt, we switch to a low-fat Greek yogurt. Instead of the honey, or maybe we just keep the honey, but we just use a little bit less of it because it's not very filling. Instead of granola, maybe we switch to oats or something like that. And instead of peanut butter, maybe we switch to we reduce the fat content overall, or we switch to just a smaller portion size. And again, same process, just by switching from a full fat yogurt to a Greek yogurt, switching from granola to oats, switching from, a certain amount of honey and peanut butter, and just reducing the portion size. We've kept the meal relatively similar, but we've substantially reduced the calories. A lot of the time, the calorie reduction comes from a reduction in fats, particularly in a fat loss phase, just because fats are not, for the most part, a lot of fat sources aren't very filling. If you look at 20 mils of oil, that's like 2 tablespoons. You could just chuck it in your mouth, gone. If you look at, and that is also 200 calories. If you look at, the same amount of calories of Greek yogurt, it's like a fucking big bowl. So a lot of the time when we're making food swaps towards lower calorie variations, a lot of the time it involves manipulating the fat content and reducing the fat content by making smart food swaps. If we want to go in the other direction and make some food swaps in the direction of increasing calories, let's say we have that same meal where it's steak, potatoes, veg, sauce, oil. If we're trying to increase calories, we would want to use oil from the bottle and maybe cook the steak and the potatoes in oil, even the veg in oil. Like something like olive oil, one of the healthiest fat sources you could get in. We might even look at adding avocado to the meal or something like that as well, or some mixed nuts. Then instead of potatoes, maybe we switch to a white rice because it's lower volume for the same amount of calories. And then when it comes to veg, we just keep the veg the same. Or if we really need to be conscious about increasing calories, maybe we'll swap to like a peas and corn or something like that. Peas, carrot, and corn or something like that, which might be a little bit higher calorie than, let's say, broccoli and cauliflower. And then when it comes to a sauce, we just go for the full-fledged good old barbecue sauce. Nice, tasty stuff. So this happens in both directions, right? So we can make food swaps to make the same meal less calories. We can use food swaps to make the same meal higher calorie. I think that's one of the best ways to make dietary changes because it doesn't feel like as big of a change as it would if you woke up one day and instead of having steak, potatoes, and veg, you were now having fish and rice, or fish and a rice cake, for those of you who understand that reference. But yeah, I just think it's a much better way to go about it. And personally, that's how I operate my meal plan creation for a lot of my clients is, let's say, for example, I'll pull one up now. I'll give an example of how I think about it in real time. Let's say, for example, I've asked for a food diary of what they usually eat on a daily basis. Let's say this individual have 2 English muffins with egg and smoky barbecue sauce. Easily there, we can go, all right, can we maybe just reduce to 1 English muffin? Or if they really just like having 2 separate sandwiches, like they like having 2 muffins, instead of 2 English muffins with 150 calories per muffin, maybe we swap to some sandwich thins and it's only 100 calories per 2 sandwich thins. And then when it comes to the egg, we just leave that as it is, but we make sure that we're being conscious of not using too many oils. And then smoky barbecue sauce, we just swap to a reduced sugar or reduced salt barbecue sauce. And just by those changes, we've saved we've reduced the calorie content by 120, 150 maybe. Same thing with lunch. Let's say they're having mince and rice with veggies, avo, and Mexican seasoning, or they're having pesto pasta. Mince and rice with veggies, avo. If we are moving into a fat loss phase, I'd be like, all right, let's keep the mince and make sure that it's a 5% lean beef mince cooked with very minimal oils. And then the rice, maybe we'll swap that to potatoes just because potato is going to be more filling than white rice. Or we swap the white rice for a quinoa or something like that. And then we keep the veggies, keep the avo, just be mindful of total fat content of the meal. And total calorie content of the meal. And we keep the Mexican seasoning because that hasn't got very many calories. I hope you can see sort of the chain of thought when I'm looking for food swaps within nutrition. If I was wanting to make higher calorie meals out of these, let's do it in the reverse. So 2 English muffins with egg and barbecue sauce. Maybe I'd go, all right, can we maybe swap to 2 bagels instead? Or even... maybe 2 bagels with eggs and smoky barbecue sauce and add some spinach or something like that. We still feel like we're eating the same amount of stuff where it's like instead of 2 muffins, it's just 2 bagels. But bagels tend to be a lot higher in calories than English muffins. And we keep the same amount of eggs, same amount of barbecue sauce. Maybe we cook the eggs in some oil if we need to add some extra calories. And there we go. We've added, 350 calories to that meal. So these are swaps that can be done in both directions. And I hope I've done a good job of explaining how I work through it mentally. Next topic I want to speak about is hunger. I'll do hunger versus cravings last. Hunger during a fat loss phase. I posted a reel today and it was a quick reel, but it was essentially saying that during a fat loss phase, at times, we need to expect that we will be hungry. That is completely normal. We are eating below our maintenance calories and asking our body to use our body fat instead of energy from food. So it's an expectation that at times we are going to be hungry, and we need to be realistic around that expectation and accept that there will be some level of hunger there. And instead of freaking out about the fact that we're hungry, Rather, we can reframe that hunger. And when we are committing to a fat loss phase and we want to go into a calorie deficit, instead of freaking out when we're hungry, we can just sit with it and go, as long as I'm not too hungry, I'm only like a 6 out of 10 hungry. I know it's a little bit annoying, but hey, at least I know there's a pretty high chance I'm in a calorie deficit. That's the reframe that we can use to make sure that we don't get so fearful and so scared of hunger, because reality is, if we want to lose fat, we're going to be a little bit hungry, and that is completely normal. We don't have to freak out and, start running around with our heads cut off just because we're a 5 out of 10 hungry. It's okay to be hungry, and you will need to accept that you're going to be hungry at times. And there's obviously things we can do to manage that, like increasing the protein intake of our diet, increasing the fiber intake, leaning on higher volume, lower calorie foods. So foods that have less calories per 100 grams, so that food fills up our stomach more and reduces our appetite. And just eating more whole foods in general, being smart about our meal timing, potentially implementing a little bit of intermittent fasting if the individual prefers it. There's a lot of things we can do to manage hunger. Caffeine intake is another thing we can do. There's so many things we can do to help minimize hunger during a fat loss phase. Reducing liquid calories, that's another thing. But at some point, we have to accept that it's normal and okay to be hungry at times during a fat loss phase. We have to expect that, especially as we get leaner and leaner and leaner. If, let's just say hypothetically, you're going from 30 to 25% body fat, you may not be crazy hungry in a 600 calorie deficit. But if I'm trying to get you from 15% down to 10% body fat and you're substantially leaner, you're probably going to be pretty hungry in that process. And we just have to accept that sometimes. We don't want to go too far with it, unless we have to be a certain weight by a particular day. If your hunger is above an 8 out of 10, 8.5 out of 10, it's a bit of an orange light where it's like, all right, let's make sure that everything's okay here. Do we need to potentially explore some dietary swaps to reduce hunger or maybe even increase calories? Because this hunger is getting out of hand, and there's a higher and higher potential that this may lead to a binge at some point. So let's put the brakes on now a little bit, increase calories or modify food volume a little bit just to reduce the chances of non-adherence, essentially. But at some point, we have to accept that some level of hunger during a fat loss phase is completely normal. And like I said, there's so many things we can do to manage it, but sometimes we just have to sit with it and just accept it, which leads us to the next or last topic of the episode, which is hunger versus cravings. So hunger versus cravings, they are not the same thing. A lot of people confuse them as the same thing, and they're craving ice cream, for example, and they're like, oh, I'm hungry. That's not necessarily the same thing. You can be hungry and craving stuff at the same time, but they aren't the same thing. So what's different? Hunger is a physical need for food. It's your body being like, you do not have enough energy. Please feed me. Give me that boiled chicken breast and head of broccoli because I am starving and will eat anything right now. Hunger is usually accompanied by physical signs of hunger as well, or physical signs of a need for energy. Stomach growling, getting the shakes because your blood sugar's low, getting lethargic, tired, getting a little bit agitated, a little bit hangry. I know I'm prone to that at times. That's the stuff that's going to accompany true hunger. Cravings, on the other hand, so hunger is a physical need for food, right? Cravings is more of a mental need or a mental want for food. And hunger is usually general. It's just, give me food. I don't care what it is. Cravings, on the other hand, are usually mental and specific. So driven towards specific foods. And cravings they're usually specific in nature, and they're usually set off by some sort of interaction with our senses. Cravings sometimes arise from specific places. So let's say, for example, the movies. I know anytime I go near Hoyt's or within a Hoyt cinema or just any cinema in general, I want popcorn. I'm like, holy shit, that buttered popcorn smells amazing. give it to me. That is a craving that is driven by an environmental factor. So it's driven by the location, the association that you've made. You just think of popcorn and the movies as a pair, the smell of the buttered popcorn. There's a reason why they have the cabinet at the front of the movie cinema and not all the way in the back so that the smell doesn't come through. They want you to smell it, crave it, and buy it. Cravings can be tied to locations. It can be tied to just habits or routine. It's like I come home from work, I open the fridge, I grab a chocolate or I grab a whatever. That is a craving that may be like a reinforced habit where stressful day, kind of sad, eat chocolate, get a little bit better. Brain goes, yep, cool. That made us a little bit happier. And that behavior gets reinforced. Cravings can also be driven by our senses. So hearing, smelling, seeing certain foods. So hearing the, pop of popcorn. I keep using the example of popcorn. But even, hearing someone else crunch a chip or hearing something specific that comes to mind is when you're at the pub and someone orders a dish that's on those hot plates that come out to your table and you hear the sizzling. It's like, oh, damn, that smells good. Like, I want that. Or seeing your favorite foods. If I see a tub of Ben & Jerry's ice cream, there's a pretty high chance that I'm going to delete that tub of Ben & Jerry's ice cream. If you smell something, so you walk past, you may not be sitting at home and craving pizza, but if you walk through the street and walk past a pizza shop, you very well may start craving pizza because you can smell it. Even just seeing things can be a trigger for cravings. So to summarize, hunger is a physical need for food, and cravings is more of a mental want for specific food choices. Hunger and cravings can occur at the same time, but a lot of the times a craving is going to be specific. Hunger is going to be general. Hunger is a physical need for food. Cravings are a mental want or mental need for food. All right. So when we talk about managing both of them, it's a different strategy. Hunger, if you have a growling stomach, if you have low energy, lethargy, or lethargic, however you want to say the word, that's probably a sign that you probably need to eat more food. Unless you're in the depths of a weight cut or a bodybuilding prep or something like that, getting to like really high levels of hunger, it's like, don't try and push through that. You're just doing yourself a disservice. But cravings, on the other hand, it's not something that we have to give into. And I think just understanding the distinction between both things, hunger versus cravings, can help us manage cravings a little bit better. Because instead of sitting there and feeling like we have to give into our cravings, if we have this understanding, we can be reflective, or we can reflect a little bit. And we can almost have that internal conversation of, am I hungry? Like, is my stomach growling? Am I flat, lethargic, tired? Or am I just having a craving right now? And we don't have to give in to cravings, but sometimes we obviously do, or we want to, but we don't have to. And the best way to get around cravings is to try and reduce your exposure to the triggers for that craving. So if you, for example, really love chocolate and you love the sound of a chocolate wrapper, you love the sight of chocolate in the fridge, you love the smell of chocolate, if it's that much of a craving that you can actually smell it, then maybe it's an option. If you still want to have it in the house, why don't you have it out of sight? Out of sight, out of mind. Put it on a high cupboard, put it in the fridge at the back behind a bunch of stuff so you can't see it. Reduce your access to it. This goes as far as, we've got some studies that looked at people's like snacking habits when we change containers from clear or see-through to non-see-through. So it could be a matter of, if you have a jar of lollies, for example, can you maybe put it in a container that you can't see through? And that will reduce your cravings for those lollies because you can't see them. You don't expose yourself to them. So for the most part with cravings, reducing your exposure to the sight, smell, or sound of those foods is probably one of the best ways to reduce cravings. But again, another great way to reduce cravings is to find sort of replacements that are a little bit of a better option. I like to explain it as, let's say, for example, your enjoyment of, let's say your enjoyment of, I'll use an example for myself. Let's say my enjoyment of Ben & Jerry's ice cream is a 10 out of 10. I just love it. I punish a whole pint easily. But that's a 10 out of 10 enjoyment for me. I recently got a Ninja Creamy, and I can make an ice cream with that. That is probably a 7.5, maybe 8 out of 10 enjoyment. Like pretty damn good, but not as good as the real stuff. But it's substantially lower calories, substantially better macronutrients, all the rest of it. So for me, the Ninja Creamy, it still gives me a level of enjoyment that's enough, right? It's not shit. Like if it was a 2 out of 10, I'd be like, it's not worth my time. But it's still an 8 out of 10 enjoyment. Like that's pretty damn good. And it helps me still indulge in my craving without having 1,200 calories from a tub of Ben & Jerry's, right? So it's trying to understand that you can indulge in cravings, but maybe it's just a good idea to have some things in place to make sure that you control how much of that food that you have, or potentially have a different version of that same food that tickles that same sort of area of your brain that feels like you indulged without actually indulging. So again, it's like, all right, you crave pizza. Can we maybe make a homemade pizza? I have some clients who in their plans, they have a pizza in their plan that's 500 to 600 calories with 40 grams of protein. Compare that to a Domino's pizza with 1,200 to 1,500 calories and a shit ton of fat. It's a much better choice, still satisfies the cravings, and still allows them to indulge somewhat, but just without the massive calorie bomb from pizza. So we don't have to always ignore cravings. Like we don't have to just push them under the rug. Sometimes it's a matter of, I crave chocolate every single day and I always end up eating half a block a day. Okay, how about we just plan for it? And we, instead of buying a block of chocolate, we buy the individually wrapped snack size chocolates and just have 2 of those a day. That is still allowing us to indulge in our cravings a little bit, but it's reducing our chances of having half a block. Some other things that can be helpful with, if you have foods that you specifically crave, something that can be helpful is to eat those foods when you're not hungry. Because if you always eat the foods that you crave when you're starving, or you get a craving, you eat that food, that's just reinforcing a pathway in your brain to say, we crave something, person eats it, let's do that again next time. What we can do instead is if we start exposing ourselves to those same foods, let's say, for example, personal example, if I just crave ice cream, if I wanted to reduce the sort of emotional drive that I had towards ice cream, it might be a good idea for me to have 100 to 200 calories of ice cream when I'm not that hungry. Because then it changes the association. It's like, oh, we can have that food whenever the fuck we want. Like we don't have to be starving and 10 out of 10 craving it to have it. So it reduces the pleasure response. Like if I right now, I'm not hungry, I just had lunch. If I go and have, a quarter of a tub of Ben & Jerry's, I'll be like, yeah, that was pretty good. If I wait all day, don't eat enough all day, and I'm tired, I'm stressed, and then I eat Ben & Jerry's, I'm like, holy fuck, that's good. And all that's doing is strengthening the craving and strengthening or positively reinforcing that behavior. It's like, feel stressed, crave this thing, eat it, feel better. If we can interrupt that pattern and instead eat or expose ourselves to that food when we're not in that same state, it can help us to detach that food from that feeling, if that makes sense. I hope I haven't gone on too much of a tangent there. I hope I haven't. But to wrap that in a bow, hunger and cravings, not the same thing. Hunger is a physical need for food. Cravings is a mental want for food. They aren't the same thing. They can occur at the same time, but they aren't the same thing. All right. I think I'm going to end that episode there. Episode number 7 of the Coastal Performance Nutrition Podcast, covering scale weight, food swaps, hunger and cravings, hunger during a fat loss phase. Any feedback, questions, comments, anything at all, my inbox over on Instagram is always open, or drop a comment down below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. But thank you again for all of the ongoing support. means the absolute world. It means I get to do more of the stuff that I enjoy the absolute most. So thank you very much. I'm rambling on now. I'm going to sign off. Peace out.